All right, welcome back to the channel. I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, The Lonesome Crown, all published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today, I'm going to be reviewing Not Dark Yet by Peter Robinson. This is book number 27 in the Inspector Banks series. Maybe you saw my reviews of books 1 and 2 earlier in this year. Well, book 27 just came out. You know, books 1 and 2 were published back in the 80s. He's been writing this series for a long time. Some of you might be familiar with it from the Inspector Banks series that's on PBS or BBC, or it's produced by some British people. Anyway, I love this series. I mean, I got the whole series up here on this shelf right here. That's all 26 right there. That's all 26 of them, folks. And this is number 27. They are all standalone books. However, at this point, 27 books in, it's kind of to the point where 27 books in, it's almost like you're better off reading them from the start, just because even though they are all standalone murder mysteries, Inspector Banks from the very first book to book number 27 goes through a lot of adventures with a lot of different characters that are in and out of all the books, so his family, his ex-wives, his kids. So it's kind of more interesting to read them in a row, just because you get to get the feeling of this guy's life as it's progressed over 30 years. And we're going to talk about some of that in this book, because some of the stuff that happens in the previous books really leads up to a lot of the stuff that happens in this book. So how does it start? Well, we always review the covers. You know, the Peter Robinson covers, they usually just have sort of some generic English scene. This looks like a sort of a cliff scene with the ocean and the, there's some sort of a cliff scene. I mean, it's very dark. There's better Peter Robinson covers than this. That's all I'm trying to say. Graphic design is nice. It fits with the other ones up top. So they all look nice on the shelf. This is just more of a generic. This cover's kind of weak in comparison to the other ones. How does this thing start? I knew I was going to love this book just from the opening scene, where the character Zelda, who's a newer character introduced into the series, one of Inspector Banks' friends, Zelda, she goes back to Russia, and she, when she was younger as she was orphaned, and she lived in an orphanage, and she was kidnapped on a specific street corner, and she goes back to that street corner to just, I don't know, to relive the kidnapping, or to make, to just somehow come to terms with what's happened to her in her life. And she gets to that street corner, and it's heartbreaking. Just reading her story up to the point where she goes to that street corner, just to see that area of the world where her whole life changed for the worse, and have her to come to terms with all this and work through the therapy in her own mind of the whole thing. I loved that scene, and I knew I was going to love this book right after that scene. And then after that scene, we jump to Inspector Banks. A completely different situation. He is watching the wedding of his daughter. And so we go from this one scene that's very dark and disturbing, and you're just horrified for the person, to another scene, Inspector Banks giving away his daughter at his daughter's wedding. And this is like one of the most happy moments in Inspector Banks' life, because throughout the 26 previous books, his daughter has been in all those books, and she has given Inspector Banks a lot of grief. I mean, she has not been the most ideal of daughters, nor has Inspector Banks been the most ideal of fathers. And so throughout the 26 books, the daughter kind of weaves through in and out of these books a lot of the times, and a lot of the grief that Inspector Banks has felt in his life has been because of choices that his daughter has made. And so now she's finally got her life together, and he's at her wedding, and it's just great. So that's what I'm talking about. It's like, yeah, this is a standalone mystery, a murder mystery, and you can read it for itself as it is. But man, if you just know the backstory of all the characters, it just adds so much more joy and depth and heartbreak to the whole thing. So what happens is there's a murder that takes place, and Inspector Banks has to go investigate this murder. Well, this murder, the person that's murdered is a person that's tied to Zelda, the girl that was kidnapped, right? The girl that goes back to Russia to look at where the street corner where she was kidnapped. And so, but Inspector Banks is like, no, I know this person wouldn't kill. So I don't think it's her, even though all the signs point to her. And he knows that she comes from a dark past. He knows that she was kidnapped as a young person and sex trafficked and all this stuff. So he knows that she's got the disturbing past, but he's like, man, she's not going to, even though she's got a motive to kill this person, and even though it's not her. Meanwhile, back in Russia, she's still back in Russia, which is like, well, she's not even around, but she was here when the murder happened. She just recently went to Russia, kind of a thing. And then, but back in Russia, she finds the guy that set up the kidnapping. Because she kind of knows what's going on. It was kind of like the leader of this orphanage would use the kids in the orphanage as bait for the kidnappers and this, that, and who would sell the kids to the kidnappers. And then she figured this all out. She kind of goes girl with the dragon tattoo on this guy, right? Which is even more badass. I was like, oh, I'm even loving this even more. Because now Zelda is got this guy that sold her to the kidnapping sex traffickers as a little kid, and now she's sort of doing girl with a dragon tattoo on this dude, torturing him and stuff like this. So then now you're thinking, as the reader, you're thinking, oh my God, maybe Zelda could be a murderer. Maybe she did commit that murder back in England that Inspector Banks is investigating. And, that's where and then I'm going to leave it at that. That's the setup to the mystery, and I'm going to leave it to that. But it goes through, all your, it's like a typical murder mystery where red herrings, this, that, the other. It's just a great, great book. And one of my favorites in the series, book number 27, not dark yet, one of my favorites in the series, despite kind of one of my least favorite covers. This one gets a good solid 8 out of 10. I just really enjoyed book number 27 in the Inspector Banks series. I would suggest, you could read this if you want, but there's 27. If you want to collect all 27, that would be your best thing, because all the books are great. I wouldn't buy them if they weren't. Or if you just want to read them sporadically here and there, that's cool too. You still enjoy them. I think the most enjoyment you're going to get out of this series is if you start with one and just read to all 27. But I've been collecting, it's been easy for me because I've been collecting these things for 25 years. So every year a new one comes out, I just read it. But anyway, not dark yet, 8 out of 10.